let's recap where Tennessee is in this SB. What do you call it again? Because I like
the SP Plus rankings. It takes into
SP
account
Plus
returning production, recent success, and recruiting. It takes those three things into account, and so it's a formulaic way to rank it.
Okay, how does it? Okay, say that again because I'm curious as to how they come up with these numbers.
Returning production.
I understand that one. That's easy.
Yep. Recent success.
Okay.
And success on the recruiting trail. And I believe recruiting success includes the transfer portal now. I believe they've adjusted their model for that.
Okay, so this is an ESPN thing. So likely they're utilizing, I would think, ESPN's rankings, which are not particularly as favorable to Tennessee because of a lot of political reasons as other ones such as On3 and Rivals. And we could get into that whole discussion of why they're not. But ESPN, just I don't know that they have anything against Tennessee necessarily. I think what happens with the other recruiting services is they have big sites in that cover Tennessee, and they get favorable recruiting rankings. Not to say Nico, for instance, isn't the top prospect of the nation. He may well be, but I would assume they take in ESPN's rankings as far as recruiting. So who is ahead of Tennessee right now? And we discussed it a little bit yesterday, but we didn't really get to dive into it because of time.
Yeah, so yesterday we had we talked about it, and Georgia was number 1. I think Ohio State was number 2, Michigan was number 3, Alabama was number 4, and Penn State was number 5. And Tennessee was number 6. Last year, Tennessee was number 10 going into the year and finished number 6.
Okay.
And so, yeah, as we discussed yesterday, I think we both agree Tennessee is going to be better than Penn State. The 3 of the others were iffy, and then Georgia they would definitely be worse. But we kind of talked ourselves into, like, outside of like LSU below them, it's hard to not see Tennessee having a top 5 caliber team this year.
No, I agree. When you look at the other teams too. So how do they factor in recent success? Is it 2 years? Is it 1 year? Do we know the answer to that? Because if recent success is based off 1 year, then Tennessee should benefit from last season. If it's based off the past 5 years, then not necessarily so.
So according to Bill Connelly, looking at it now, it's using a sliver of information from previous seasons 2 to 4 years ago. He says it's about 15% of the puzzle. And so looks like 4 years is the max that they go up to, but I think they obviously heavily weight recency a little more. So yes, and he is incorporating transfers this year for recruiting success, both quality and volume. So last year was the first year they incorporated transfers, and they didn't really come up with the formula on how to handle that. So I think this year they're doing a better job with that. The story on this one is after doing the SP Plus, they kind of did a different top 10, which was a little weird, where they did a best and worst case scenario for every team. And Tennessee's ceiling to floor range was about number 10 on the list. So their ceiling is 11-1, and their floor is 7-5 based on SP Plus rankings. And they have a 13% chance of finishing 11-1 or better. So even though he listed 11-1 as the ceiling, I mean, a 13% chance of finishing better than 11-1 is pretty good.
Yeah, it's really good. Gene says that Ken Palm has Tennessee at number 4 and their defense at number 1. So Gene's going to send us
That's basketball.
Link. Oh, you're talking basketball? Okay. So we're talking about football right now, Gene. Sorry to throw you off, but let's get to 4 downs, and it's going to revolve around that. 4 downs brought to you by Vassy Lawn and Garden. Man alive, it's worth the drive. Whether you're in Knoxville or Nashville or Chattanooga, Vassy Lawn and Garden is in Cleveland, and they've got the industrial mowers, the commercial mowers, and residential. They're absolutely phenomenal. 4 downs brought to you by Vassy Lawn and Garden. Man alive, it's worth the drive.
4 downs. 4 questions. 4 answers. The Dave Hooker Show.
Four.
Downs. A presentation of offthehooksports.com.
Makes me think of that goofy commercial with Tony Romo in it, talking about Bushwood and Caddyshack and all that stuff. Boy, we haven't even talked about the Super Bowl commercials, but let's talk about Tennessee football. That's way more fun and way more bona fide. I'm going to make you pick between 11-1 and 7-5. You only have 2 options. First down, 11-1 or 7-5. And by the way, if you want to weigh in on the message board, do so. Whether or not you're watching live or you're watching on a delay, we're live every morning at 10 Eastern. But go ahead and weigh in, and we'll get back to you and give you a response. We respond to all comments. You got to pick 11-1 or 7-5. Okay, what are you picking?
Those 2 options, 11-1, easy, and not just on Tennessee's talent. I mean, they could be a top 20 team, and I'd go 11-1. Their schedule is Tennessee's schedule is relatively garbage next year. Let's just say it. It's not good.
What would it take for 7-5? It would take a big quarterback issue, right? Either Joe Milton is not ready for prime time, and Nico is not ready for prime time as well. Both quarterbacks would have to have issues. I guess I could be Stephen A. Smith and go devil's advocate here, but I don't see any chance at Tennessee 7-5. So if I have to choose between the 2, it would be 11-1. All right, you got to pick a surefire loss before we get to the surefire win. Second down, surefire loss, Caleb.
I mean, if I'd have to stick with Georgia as a surefire loss, even more than Alabama, because if Alabama starts Jalen Milroe next year, which Nick Saban is capable of being dumb enough to do that if you know his history of misusing quarterbacks, then Tennessee has a great chance of beating Alabama. So I think Georgia is the one surefire loss this year.
I'm going to take Alabama because I'm hearing that Nick Saban is not on board with the Jalen Milroe thing from a source close to Alabama, and he doesn't think he's the future, and they're going to do something else. I don't know what that something else is, but I think that's also part of the reason they're going to more of a pro-style offense, so there's not as much pressure on the quarterback like there was Bryce Young. If they might Bryce Young, that's a 4-loss team last year. So surefire loss, I would have to go Alabama being on the road as well. Surefire win, may I go first? It's
Yes.
South Carolina. They're going to hammer South Carolina. If you can get numbers on that right now, I don't care if it's 14, 17 points, take Tennessee to cover because this team's still mad about that. They're going to hammer South Carolina.
So
don't go Vandy on me, surefire win. Pick something that's slightly debatable.
Oh, I was going to go Austin Peay. Okay, so we can't do – so basically we're not including Virginia, Austin Peay, Texas San Antonio, Vanderbilt, UConn. Those are all 5 of those are circled wins.
You got to take something that's within a 10-point spread or so.
Well, since you said South Carolina, I'm going to say the game after South Carolina, Texas A&M. I think Texas A&M is falling apart as a program under Jimbo Fisher. I think the program is an absolute disaster this year. This Jimbo Fisher Bobby Petrino thing will not work out. You heard it here first. This is Jimbo Fisher's last year. That's it. I'm saying it here, guys. This is Jimbo Fisher's last year, and Texas A&M is going to have to eat $50 million or whatever.
I tend to think you're right. And that whole program's like a motorcycle wreck. Get it? That train wreck. All right, 4th down. Will the Vols make the college football playoff? Yay or nay? Will the Vols make the college football playoff? Just 4 teams. If this is 12, I think we're at an absolute yes. But that's a year away. So will the Vols make the college football playoff this year?
No, they won't.
Okay, who makes it above them? Because right now there are only a handful of teams. If we go back to this ranking, the SP ranking from ESPN, if we go back to that, there's only a handful of teams. So
there's going to be a Big 12 team get in by default, TCU style, because they didn't play anybody. So they get in with 1 loss or 0 losses because of their schedule. I don't know who that Big 12 team is going to be. They won't be one of the 10 best teams in the country, but they're going to get into the playoff. Then there is going to be the Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, one of those teams. I can't believe I said Penn State. Ohio State and Michigan. One of them is getting to the playoff for winning the Big Ten. I still think the SEC comes down to Georgia or Alabama. Those are three. I think the fourth is going to be either the second team among Georgia and Alabama or a Pac-12 team or Pac-16 team sneaks in. I think it's going to be one of those two. I don't see Tennessee. I don't see room for Tennessee at that point.
I don't think Tennessee makes it, but I think they're knocking on the door similar to last year. I don't think they'll have any sort of meltdown like they had at Columbia. So I think Tennessee is knocking on the door and in a very similar situation where maybe they're just an odd man out. But 2024, we're talking about a whole different ballgame with a bigger playoff and a more settled quarterback position. And I believe it'll be Nico rolling into a second year with about a half dozen starts under his belt at the bare minimum. That's my going out on a limb thing. Caleb does that often. But I believe at some point Nico is going to take over this job sooner rather than later.